I was studying what's called the historical avant-garde. So that would be the historical moment in the early 20th century in America, Europe, particularly Europe. So that's like Picasso, Marcel Duchamp, their milieu. And a aspect of that was their interest in theoretical mathematics. I don't know if you would call it experimental, but that pertained to, and this was kind of a general cultural interest that was about, so you have like the spatial fourth dimension, or just the fourth dimension before Einstein kind of popularized it as being time. And it kind of ties into like esoteric knowledge and theosophy and spiritism or spiritualism, and there's a whole lot of interesting history to get into that. A lot of architects and people like that were interested in it, and so like you see that show up in designs and architectural features, proposals for lobbies, things like that. But also a lot of Marcel Duchamp's notes, understanding more and less in different areas about things like pseudospheres and things like that. There's also pretty significant counter theory to Picasso and Cubism that's more of a spatial theory rather than Einstein, but there's kind of conflicting historians interested in that. So, like Cubism kind of traditionally being thought of as showing multiple views at the same time. So that can be a purely spatial thing, not necessarily over time. Like walking around something and seeing space, that's a time thing versus like showing multiple views existing at the same time. So that's where the Tessercat, which is kind of like a play on the word tesseract, which is a hypercube, a four-dimensional cube. So if you think spatially, you have a point and then you have a line, and as you keep adding dimensions that are like at right angles, then you get a rectangle, and then you find something perpendicular to that. It goes from 1 to 2 to 3 dimensions. So you have two lines that are perpendicular, and that's how you can draw a square. And then something perpendicular to that, then you have depth, so that becomes a cube. So then the question is, what is perpendicular to that? And that's a higher dimension of space that we're not capable of understanding or viewing, but there's the idea that maybe we're experiencing it in some way. And this, of course, is like radium's discovered, so there's X-rays, and there's this interest in like science and mysticism kind of all about. And so I'm, this is like work I was doing as a doctoral student in art history, in seminars and stuff like that. And so I'm always drawing and thinking about things, and this, drawing cats, that's always fun. And you're like, I feel like drawing something. So a cat is a good starting point. But you're also reading theory and things trying to explain these kinds of concepts of like what higher dimensions of space might look like. And particularly my interest in drawing and painting, that's always been kind of the basis of what I've done, and experimenting in other mediums and stuff like that. But I always come back to painting and drawing. And I like the way you're creating space, and you're similarly creating abstract space when you draw. So like the historian and critic Clement Greenberg pointed out, like the moment you draw a single line, you've created like the illusion of space on a page, because now you have like form, and you have a figure, and you have a ground, you have the line in the background. And so it's very helpful in trying to think through mathematical concepts when you're in a humanities setting, and in kind of, these concepts that oscillate between real mathematic things, real physics and stuff like that, and then this kind of fantastic or artistic or romantic tendencies. And I find this very fascinating and interesting, and it leads to really creative and interesting images. So these two kind of met, and then they become these kind of cats from the fourth dimension. So it plays into that idea of mysticism or magic or something like that. I don't personally believe these things, so it's also interesting to see. And I mean, I think, someone like Duchamp is like interested in that, but I don't know how much of a true theosophist he was. But there's a lot of interesting concepts that come up reading about it, or learning about this kind of period in time. So to me, it becomes more kind of like playful. I'm not interested in like creating a huge mythos around like what are these mystery cats that appear to me, but I like the way they kind of playfully can fit into the artistic process. So you have like the creative impulse, and we'll call it the flow state or in the zone, or it kind of depends on what the buzzwords are, but there is this, and you can call it meditative or spiritual, mindful moment, where you're really in the groove and you're drawing and you're sort of like thinking visually and making decisions, but not in the same way you make like decisions when you're thinking linguistically or planning ahead. So you're in a very sort of responsive, trance-like state. So I can see how that becomes things like there's a medium, you're the medium, and the spirituality or the other realm is speaking through you. It fits nicely. For me, it's like an intuitive process. As you're being trained as an artist, particularly in graduate school, there's this push to like have a plan and execute it, and it's, I think the professionalization has really caused people to suffer. How is this going to be executed? How's it going to be produced? Things like that. And I'm just kind of a modernist, and I subscribe to the artist in the garret just making stuff up as he goes along. And the Tesser cats are part of accepting that this is the way I make art, and that's okay, even though you can't necessarily verbalize why is it the way it is, how do you defend the painting. And it's I just kind of let it happen. And it's well, how was the studio today? Sometimes it's really great, and then sometimes it's I don't know, I'm not feeling it today. So then you could say well, the cats weren't appearing to me, or the cats aren't talking today. And yeah, so I like having that kind of engagement with the imaginary. There's a way that you could be encouraged to go that's oh, these are paintings that are representations of these cats, and I have a whole mythology built up and a narrative around it and things like that. And that's not what this is. I don't think that that's a key to unlocking what it's about. I'm not trying to embed it with that kind of concept. It kind of became a prompt, or what does a four-dimensional cat look like? And it's kind of a silly thing, but it's a jumping off point. It's a way, because if you can make anything in art, but you have to make something. So it's very me to be interested in those kinds of things. And yeah, it's serious and silly, or smart and stupid. So yeah, that becomes a point to riff on.